right, and we should be live right now. Hey, everybody, how's it going? Matthew Kadish here from the Salty Nerd Podcast, and today we are going to be doing another Bad Writing live stream, which is going to be our regular Thursday show. And on it, I get together a lovely and talented panel of critics and authors and all that good stuff to basically break down the different elements of everything Hollywood does wrong and try to teach you guys what to avoid and what to do as a writer, and also how to critically look at things as a general movie and TV watcher and figure out whether stuff is worth watching and worth your time or not. So I have my whole panel here. I'm going to introduce you to each of them in turn. So this beautiful bald man to my left here, or right, depending on how you're watching it, is Odin of OMB Reviews. He's a longtime friend. I think we first met each other in 2018 when he started featuring my critical articles about The Last Jedi, and since then I found out that he has extremely good taste. So Odin, why don't you introduce everyone to yourself and let them know where they can find out more about you.
Well, thank you for that beautiful introduction. I am indeed Odin of OMB Reviews, where I talk about movies in the form of reviews, pop culture. Also, I do box office breakdowns, which is kind of a passion of mine. I don't know why I ever got into numbers, because I've always hated math, but hey, sometimes you just got to deal with the things as they come by. But I've always been a huge fan of movies, and yeah, as Matthew was saying, we kind of got to know each other because he had these amazing articles breaking down from an objective level why those films were so bad. And I thought it was a good way to kind of, instead of having the discussion be about how round Rian Johnson's head was, to instead talk about, the actual, fatal flaws of the story as well. And it also ended up leading to some really awesome discussions, which ended up kind of, I think, outing some people claiming to have contracts and things like that. It was a lot of fun back in the day.
Back in the day. It's no longer fun anymore, though.
No, it's not, but...
And
thank you for having me on, good sir.
You're welcome. That man making all the noise is a good friend of mine, Jeffrey Haskell, who's also a USA Today best-selling author and
Wall Street.
Yeah, the author of the Full Metal Superhero book series. He's a superhero novelist, not a comic book artist, but a novelist. And I've known Jeffrey for a long time. He's a very talented author. And I'm very excited that he agreed to come on my show because, like me, he has a very analytical mind, and he comes at it from the point of view of an actual storyteller. So, Jeff, why don't you tell everyone about yourself and about your books?
Well, you did such a great job. I don't know what I can add. But, I'm a father, husband, storyteller, pretty much in that order. I'm about to have 5 kids. We got one on the way. Think about that for a second. After 3, your brain rots. My wife is also a really talented graphics designer and cover designer, so she does all my covers. So they're outstanding covers, professional quality. And so I write 2 superhero series. One's the Full Metal Superhero, and one is called Superhero by Night. Full Metal Superhero is a sort of a high-tech Tony Stark type adventure, and then Superhero by Night is your Punisher-esque vigilante, take no holds barred, kill all the bad guys kind of adventure. I love writing, love storytelling. I've got upwards of 20 some odd books. Those 2 series plus a bunch of other books I've written, trilogies and whatnot. I got my start when I won a Kindle Scout contest when they used to have those, and they published me back in 2016. And the rest is history. I'm full-time author and storyteller. I met Matthew because we were in a group together on Facebook, and people got mad at him and started banning his articles. And I was like, oh, this is the guy I want to know.
Yeah, and I believe Jeffrey just passed the 50,000 books sold mark, so congratulations to you, sir.
Thank you.
Very great.
Almost as good as having a kid.
Yeah, almost.
Yeah, almost.
And last but not least, the man, the myth, the legend himself, Mr. Reagan, no relation to actual Ronald Reagan. Sadly. But Mr. Reagan is a political commentator, but also he is a very talented storyteller in and of his own right. So, Chris, why don't you introduce yourself and let everyone know what makes you qualified to talk about movies and TV shows?
Oh, well, I am both pretentious and arrogant. And I really should just be a movie critic. I just subscribed to OMB Reviews. So if you're not subscribed to OMB Reviews, do so now.
Actually, Chris,
Thank you.
Odin also does a political channel as well that you should check out because his political stuff is actually really good.
Okay, what's the political channel called?
The OMB Report.
Oh, the OMB Report. Okay,
just look for the golden thumbnails and you'll find it.
The golden thumbnails. Yep. Okay, subscribe. You have far fewer viewers, far fewer subscribers on that channel. But what's
that one's
interesting
had
about
some
that,
trouble with YouTube, as I'm sure you know. YouTube doesn't like us talking about certain topics.
No. Well, I'll tell you what's interesting is you have a thriving channel, clearly, talking about pop culture, I guess, or is it books, or and and you're trying to develop a political channel. I have a thriving political channel, kind of. YouTube does censor me quite a bit, but I want to maybe do a new channel talking about pop culture. I haven't decided yet, but I'm considering it. I may do that, and then we'll have all kinds of like incestuous relationships between all of our channels and talk about pop culture and all that fun stuff. So no, I'm Mr. Reagan on YouTube. If you want to learn about conservative politics and either hate me or love me, go on Mr. Reagan YouTube channel and listen to me rant about politics. I just actually had my best interview I've ever done. I had these two guys on. Actually Matthew Kadish was watching, which was great fun to have him calling me afterwards and saying, dude, you ended your broadcast, but you're still live. What are you doing?
He couldn't figure out how to hit the end broadcast button.
Yeah. I hit end broadcast, but then it says, are you sure you want to end the broadcast? And I didn't notice that for a second. I was like, no, we're talking about shooting this stuff, And I'm like, wait a minute. Yes, I am. Why would you even ask that?
I'm afraid I can't allow that.
I wouldn't click the end broadcast button if I didn't mean it. Come on. But anyway, yeah. So, but the two guests that I had on were former FBI, and you guys, this was incredible. They were basically like, I'm like, hey, did Jeffrey Epstein kill himself? They're like, definitely not. I'm like, hey, what's going on with the FBI? What's with all the January 6th insurrection and the Whitmer case and everything? And they're like, yeah, they're totally corrupt. I mean, it's intense.
Thank you, Captain Obvious.
Yeah, thank you. But to hear it from former FBI, I think is actually very powerful.
And so matter-of-factly as well.
Oh yeah, they were very clear. So it's a 2-hour podcast. I mean, it's a 2-hour interview, so it's a bit of time, but it's definitely worth watching. If not all at once, then in installments. But anyway, enough about me. Let's talk about the world.
Yes, let's talk about Hollywood, which is what everyone's here for. But before we go,
that's not the world. Just FYI.
Yeah. I just want to thank
the world of fiction and pop culture is what I meant.
Yes.
Yeah. I just want to thank Raj H for a Canadian $2 super sticker. Thank you, sir. Appreciate that.
It's like $1.25.
It's like 10 cents each, right?
I don't know. Canada's much more expensive, so we'll see how it goes. All right, guys. So we're going to be talking today. The theme of the bad writing episode is the mistakes Hollywood makes when crafting sequels, and these aren't necessarily, just for movies and TV shows, but it's also for books and sequels in general. Because it seems like there's a lot of things that kind of go on when Hollywood's formulating, hey, we got a hit on our hands, let's continue that, and they tend to make the same mistakes over and over that just make the sequels nowhere near as good as the original. And it's very rare to find a sequel that's better than the original. So one of the things that I want to start off with is talking about the most common mistake that I think most Hollywood filmmakers make when they're crafting a sequel, which is no growth for the main character. So basically, oftentimes writers will complete the main character's development in the original story, and they will not know how to advance the character in the sequel. So in the first original storyline, the character has a complete arc. He goes from point A to point B, emotionally, mentally, physically. And by the time he's kind of completed that arc, the storyteller's sitting there like, I don't know what to do with this guy. And so I wanted to throw it to you guys about where have you seen this mistake happen before, and how do you think people can go about not making it? So Odin, why don't we start with you? What do you think about this one?
No, I think this is totally spot on. I'm always one to blank when try to think of examples off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure that in this one especially, you start to kind of realize why a lot of modern day sequels especially, and I'm sure you can find a lot of it within even like old school Hollywood filmmaking as well, but more so in modern Hollywood, you realize just how much of a cash grab a lot of sequels tend to be. And you can really always tell that by what are we actually learning about the main character? Are we learning anything at all? Is there any growth whatsoever? Or are we just kind of getting the main character back doing the same jokes, the same, shtick all over again? And I guess a modern example of that could be the ill-fated, no one ever was asking for it except maybe 20 years ago when the film first came out, and that was Dumb and Dumber 2. And they did the same jokes, the same thing all over again. And it was just one of those things where it fell so flat because of it. It was funnier, 20 years ago when comedy was different, because I think that's the other issue too, especially with, whether it's comedy or any other type of storytelling, is that they try and recapture the same magic that the first one did, but what they end up creating are characters that are basically stuck in whatever time period they first came out, whether it's a sequel that came out 5 years later or 10 years later. It just feels like they're stuck, and every now and then they maybe try and add more modern elements into it, but typically it just then at that point just feels outdated and like the magic is just gone. And not having well-developed characters is obviously a big part of that problem as well.
Yeah, Chris, what do you think about this in terms of like how do you handle a character in a sequel that has already gone through a complete story arc?
Yeah, well, let's define terms here. Character development and character growth are two very different things, right? So character development is how you present a character in such a way that the audience begins to feel like they know this character, they love the character, right? That should be done not in your first film, but like in the first half of your first film. I mean, that needs to happen pretty early on. You need to, you can have
first 5 minutes, really.
First 5 minutes, really. Yeah, if you can get that done as soon as possible. Now, you can have character development throughout a film, of course. You can have character development throughout multiple films, of course. But really, you need to establish who the character is and get the audience to love them as soon as you can. Once that's done, yeah, you definitely want character growth, which this is where we get to a character arc, right? Where you have, the character is maybe young and naive at the beginning, and then he's a little bit wiser at the end, or he's got some kind of trauma at the beginning that he gets over, or he has, something happens. There's a change in the character. Maybe it's a redemption character where he's, Darth Vader at the beginning of Star Wars, and then the character growth by the end is he's the redemption character. He has to save his son. So, character growth and character development are two very different terms, so we should clarify that straight up. And then what I would like to say is, like Jeffrey was saying, yeah, you want the character development to at least be, you want the character established to some degree very early on so that people love him. And then you need character growth beyond that. Now, once you're done with the first film, I do think that it is somewhat difficult for some writers to say, now, how do we give the character more growth in the second film? And how do we and to me, it's pretty easy. You just put them on a new journey. It's just a new journey, right? Because you exist, and this is something we're going to talk about with a lot of the other chapters. I know you sent us a file with all the chapter headings, so we know where we're going with this to some degree. But I would like to say that you can really change the story in almost any way you want, as long as you still exist within the world of the original film. If you exist within the world of the original film, people like that world. You could use different characters. You can go completely different storyline, just so long as you're in that world and you are true to that world, and people are still attached in some way to it. If you maintain the integrity of the world and people like the world you're living in, do anything you want. Just write a good story within that world. If the first story was more of a fantastical adventure and the second story is more of a mystery, I actually think that's fine, so long as you maintain the integrity of the world and you're telling a damn good story. And people want to exist within that world and want to hear a great story. And if you can do both of those things, maintain the integrity of the world and tell an awesome story, I think you can get away with kind of anything else. But the problem is, people don't just want to maintain the integrity of the world. They want to maintain the integrity of, like Odin was saying, they want to almost copy, the original film sometimes, go back to all the old shtick that worked the first time, because I think once you have a hit, a lot of times people are, in an original film, a lot of times people are brave, because if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But if hey, it works, it could be a big deal. Once it's a big deal, once it's established as a big deal, then they get safe. This is like Ghostbusters 2, where they're like, okay, let's not try to do anything too different, too crazy, because we don't want to lose anybody. We want to stay safe. And so with that, I think that people limit themselves, and then they forget the fundamentals. They forget stuff like character growth. The character there has to be some kind of arc. There has to be some kind of redemption or learning or something like that. But as to the character development, no, that needs to happen pretty early on. It can continue on, but more we got to focus on character growth for the next movie and stuff like that. But that's just a fundamental of writing.
Yeah.
Every time you write something, it needs to have that element.
I like that defining
Jeff,
the terms you had.
Yeah, thanks for that. So Jeff, what do you think? What would you do with a character who's already completed a character arc for a sequel? Because I know that a big kind of strength that you have is the getting down into the character, right? So as a professional novelist, what's your take on this?
Well, it's really interesting what Chris said, because I agree completely with all of it. Up to and including the part where he said that writers don't seem to know how to do this. The most egregious example I can think of is somebody mentioned it, the TARDIS mentioned it in chat, is Oliver Queen in Arrow. Like every single season, it's like Oliver tries to do it by himself. Oliver realizes he needs friends. Oliver lies to his friends. Oliver realizes that lying is bad. Which is sad, because the first season was so good, and I really wanted it to continue like that. But I had this discussion online the other day, or my wife had this discussion online the other day, because she's a storyteller too, and she was talking to somebody, and they proposed a general question: how many chapters do I have to get people to be invested in my book? And me and her both laughed. Chapters? You've got a sentence. You've got one sentence, maybe two. And in movies and TV shows, you've got about 3 minutes. You've got to. It's why so many people default to in media res or in media
to initially establish the character. You mean? Yeah.
To initially establish the character and make it interesting in a way that we want to see that character. For instance, one of the best. You can
develop it throughout the story.
Oh yeah. You can totally develop it, but I mean like that initial hook. You know what I mean? Like this is a character I want to learn more about, and my best example of it is Jack Sparrow in the first Pirates of the Caribbean. You see him, he's on the mast, and he's looking at the sunset, and he jumps down, and he's in a rowboat that's sinking. Beautiful character introduction. Right. Just, it makes you immediately want to see that character more. And so that's the kind of character introduction, that you have to have, and you have to have it every single time.
Or Indiana Jones with the whip.
Oh, yeah, Indiana Jones with the whip, yeah. One of the things, Chris, you probably are familiar with is the trope of waking up at the beginning of the movie. All the amateur filmmakers.
I've never really noticed that pattern, but that's
really?
Yeah. I'm starting to think about it.
It's a clock. The clock goes off. The main character gets up, and you watch them as they brush their teeth and take a shower. And it's like
student films start like that.
Right? Yeah. And when I was an amateur storyteller, when I first started writing and really studying story, you have these impulses to do these things, and that's one of them. Oh, I'll start with the book with the character waking up, or I'll start the book with the character with no memory. You did that. All this stuff, and you come to realize as you gain experience that everybody who starts storytelling has these same ideas, and you have to move beyond that to the level where I'm going to start the book with the character falling out of the sky about to die, or I'm going to start the book with the character talking about how the city she lives in killed her brother and she hates it. Impactful moments that not only set the tone for the character, but set the tone for the story. And ideally, a scene tells a whole lot of things, right? So a scene, especially the opening scene of a movie or TV show, should tell people who the character is and what their best trait is, right? So if they're, someone who saves lives, then they should be saving a life when the book opens, that kind of thing. So in a sequel, how do you do that, right? How do you do that? Well, the best sequel I have ever seen is Winter Soldier, right? So you have Captain America. By the end of the first movie, he's who he's going to be, right? He's Captain America. And in the second movie, he's still Captain America, but the world is not 1945. The world is shades of gray now. So now the story isn't how does Cap change, to fit into this world. It's how does Cap adjust his way of thinking to get what he wants done in this world that now exists in shades of gray. So the world changed. Steve didn't change. And so you see the juxtaposition of the world that's all, Nick Fury and spies against Cap, who's all like, no, there's right and there's wrong, and that's it. And they carry that through to Civil War and the rest of the series. They kind of drop it at the end, which I was kind of disappointed about. But Endgame was still pretty awesome. So, and then you have
Chris Evans was like that in real life. But.
You know what? If you have to like actors in real life and musicians in real life,
I know.
Right? You wouldn't watch or listen to anything, right?
It's always so disappointing, though.
I remember when I was a kid in the '80s, sequels would come out, and I'd be like, they just remade the first movie. You're talking about cash grabs. That was the '80s was the king of the cash grabs.
Yeah, we're going to get to that in a minute. But in terms of a kind of not knowing what to do with the main character in a sequel, I feel like there are 4 different things that you can do, and to varying degrees of success. And I think that in our pre-show kind of brainstorming session, we kind of covered these. So the first is character regression, which is where like the character kind of goes back on what he learned from the first story and in a way regresses. And this has to do with like maybe him being defeated or his worldview challenged and he doesn't know how to cope with it. And so he actually kind of regresses back to what he was before he had a complete character journey. Then you have the steadfast character, which is like Captain America, what Jeff was just talking about. I like to throw in Superman as well, where basically he's a character that doesn't change, but the drama and the story is basically there are outside forces trying to change that character, and the drama comes from him trying to stay true to his ideals. So it's basically him actively not trying to change. Then there's character evolution.
Can I comment on that real quick? Just real quick.
Well, I'm going to let you guys comment on all this stuff. I just want to get through these 4 real quick. So the third one is character evolution, which is, as Chris said before, like a whole new character arc. So, if you have a complete character arc in the first movie, you put him on a completely different character arc where he has to basically, change and adjust in a different way than what we saw in the first movie. And then finally, it's the killing off or replacing of the main character. So you just put someone totally new in to the main character, antagonist or protagonist slot and give them a journey to go on. All right, so if you guys want to kind of just comment on any of those 4 things, feel free to expand on them.
Well, I think with Captain America staying steadfast through that Winter Soldier film, I believe that was the one in which, or was it Civil War? I think Civil War was where he had to reconcile the fact that he was no longer working for the good guys, right?
No, that was Winter Soldier.
Oh, that was Winter Soldier. Okay.
Yeah.
So to me, that was really, and that's kind of what I'm going through right now, actually. I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but I am actually a superhero. Yeah, true. Yeah. No, no, but like with the government right now, I've always felt like, okay, I'm a conservative. I like small government. But at the end of the day, I always felt like the FBI was on our side, the CIA was on our side. They were looking out for us. They were acting in the best interest of Americans, and really the ones that they were targeting for the most part were criminals, terrorists, international espionage, that kind of stuff. Now it looks like they're turning on the American public, and the more I look into it, the more I research it for my show, the more I realize these are not the good guys anymore. At least, not the guys at the upper echelon, like a lot of the lower level agents. And so I'm having to turn, my perspective against those that I used to trust and I used to admire.
They're becoming movie characters, which is terrifying.
Oh my God, yeah. The actual federal government is like supervillains now. It's like, what the hell? That's what I mean by I'm a superhero. It's kind of a joke, but it's kind of true. Yeah. Anybody who is fighting against that, I think to some degree is like a real modern day superhero. We're all trying to like fight against these supervillains. But anyway, so I actually bizarrely, retrospectively, relate to Captain America in that film because he's actually having to go through a change in himself, not with his principles or not with it's not character growth so much. It's his eyes are opening to the truth and to the reality, which is another way of doing it. I mean, even though the character is maintaining his integrity, maintaining his principles, he is still changing in a way because of the environment, and that's a natural. That's a good way of writing. It's a good way of writing to create external circumstances that your character has to adapt to, especially if he's the kind of character who does not like change. Captain America doesn't want to turn against the government. He feels like he has to because they're now the bad guys. Anyway, that's just my perspective on what Jeffrey was saying.
All right, Odin, Jeffrey, do you have any more to add to the no growth for the main character point?
Well, I mean, you mentioned 4 things, and 2 of them work, and 2 of them never work. And saying never in a storytelling context is pretty hard because you can almost always find someone who's done it
An exception,
and it worked. Yeah, an exception. But generally speaking, there are 2 ways to handle a character arc in most genre fiction, and I'm talking genre fiction here. If you're, writing or watching litfic, that's kind of a whole other ballpark. And so, we're talking sci-fi, fantasy, and action adventure, and that kind of thing. And so I'm a fan of both. As long as if you're doing the steadfast character, the most interesting thing you can do is put them into an environment that conflicts with their character, right? So you don't want them to change. So the story becomes trying to change them, and the theme becomes them not, or the plot becomes them not changing. So it becomes, you get this really great, dichotomy and this conflict, which is of course where drama comes from. So I'm a huge fan of the steadfast character. In my book series, I've got the book where she, saves her parents. I got the book where she travels through time. The book where she fights the aliens. And she's Arsenal. Lockhart is a steadfast character. So she doesn't have to go through all these changes every single book, because let's be honest, finding a new way to grow a character for 9 books would be really, really, in my opinion, would be really hard. So this is the book where she learns the lesson that, no, she has the core of who she is, and it changes, the world changes, and she has to adapt to it. So I'm a big fan of the steadfast character. Once you've introduced them and made people like them, you don't have to have that character change in every single story. And sometimes you can have other characters change to highlight the fact that this character isn't changing. Going back to the Winter Soldier, Black Widow is a perfect example of that. She changed dramatically from the beginning of that movie to the end of that movie, and I thought that was pretty cool.
With Marty McFly in the first Back to the Future, I'm not sure how much he changes, but his circumstances totally change. So he
but he changes too, because because he goes from my parents are terrible, my family sucks, to I love my family's awesome, and I saved them. So there's some change. In the sequels, though, I think he becomes more of a steadfast character.
Then again, it does benefit the fact that his family does become better objectively. So I'm sure that helps him love his family a bit more too.
That whole movie is about him saving his family.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
And by the time you get to Back to the Future Part 2, that has run its course, where he not only saves his family from the past, but also from the future. And then by the 3rd movie, it's Doc Brown's movie, So
it's true. Yeah. Well, the point I'm trying to make, I guess, is that you can have a steadfast character who doesn't change, but in that case, I think typically they're like an audience identification character. You are the character in your mind when you're reading the book or when you're watching the film, and so you do want the character's circumstances to change to some degree. When I first started writing, I was always a little bit irritated with films that would start with the action and end with the action, and I wouldn't see any difference in the character's life. It was like they got into a bad circumstance, they got out of that bad circumstance, and life went on the same as it was before. That always irritated me. I always felt like if you don't have character growth, you need character circumstances to grow. So you need something, I'm always a big fan of putting a little bit of the character's life into the viewer's mind kind of before we get to the action, so that we can see what their life is like, which is exactly what they did in Back to the Future. And then showing a little bit of their life after the action to show how their life has changed. And if the character isn't changing, I do want to see some change in their fortune, some change in their circumstances. Most of the time, that's not always true, but as a rule, I like to do that.
I know what you're talking about, Chris, because I've seen those movies, and I'm always like, okay, this is a fundamental misunderstanding of the hero's journey. Right. Yes, you return to the normal world, but you are changed when you return to the normal world. The normal world is different because your perspective is different.
Yeah.
And when the movie begins and ends, and literally there's no difference between the beginning and the ending, you're like, what was the point?
Why did I just watch this?
I hear you.
Gasso makes a really good point about Marty's change that occurs in the film as well, is how when he comes back, he originally he's a hothead, he has no control over it, and then all of a sudden he has that self-control now because of the journey that he's gone through.
I think that was in the 2nd and 3rd movie, though. I don't know if
Yeah, the
chicken
second
thing
movie
came
was
in.
about being chicken. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it is a trilogy, so like there's an overarching story arc and character arc, and
Yeah.
another example of good writing, which we're not talking about right now. So
Yeah.
the second thing we're going to talk about.
Well, I did want to mention one last thing
talk
about
about
storytelling,
good
though, because
Yeah, go ahead.
again, it doesn't really fit, I think, within necessarily the sequel, but like people are talking about just kind of like the way in which the characters, that opening to Up is just so powerful.
I don't remember it.
Oh, the first 5 minutes, that's why it's almost
Don't
like a
watch
sequel.
it. Don't watch it.
The first 5 minutes, it breaks your heart, but it's like you're watching a movie in the first 5 minutes, and then it goes into another film, which is essentially the sequel, but it's all like a self-contained
Is this
story.
when the
in
wife
some way.
dies, kind of thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
You see their
But
whole
it's just
life,
like-
beginning to end,
Yep.
and it's like it's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
It's been a long time since I've seen that film. So.
Yeah, it's powerful though.
Damn it, we're not talking about good movies here.
He's so irritated. Look at him.
So
Bad writing.
yeah, the second mistake that I see in a lot of Hollywood sequels is they put in too many antagonists, too many villains. And, you see this a lot in superhero movies where basically, you get...
Haskell saying that he does this.
Yeah, you get like the multiple Batman villains, you get the multiple Spider-Man villains. And this is kind of part and parcel with the no growth for the main character in the sequels because they don't know what to do with the main character. So they're like, let's put in more bad guys. And then they spend like half the movie setting up the bad guys and their character arcs and their rivalry with the good guy. And by the time you get to the meat of the story, you're like, I'm more invested in the villains than I am with the hero, and I don't care what the hero does. So why don't we talk about this a little bit? Jeff, you seem to have a lot to say, so we'll just jump to you.
Okay, Chris, I do not do that. I try to focus on one
Well,
thing
you were
at a
doing
time.
this. You were pointing
Well,
at
because I
yourself.
wanted to go first.
Okay. Well, just yell into the microphone.
I
I'm
don't
going
like to-
first.
I don't like to
No,
interrupt
do
people.
it. Just be rude.
Okay,
That's
I will.
my.
I'll
That's
be
my.
rude.
Yeah.
Or raise the finger, be like, point of privilege. That's me.
Point of
That's me.
privilege. Mr. Senator, point of privilege. You suck. So the two trilogies that are series that are famous for this are the original Batman series, right, and the original Spider-Man series. And I find it really interesting how that all came about. Because Sam Raimi doing Spider-Man 3, it was supposed to just be Pete and
Venom?
Sandman, I think. And Venom was added later on. And Gwen Stacy was added later on. And all that stuff was added later on because Sony came to him and said, hey, listen, here's your new script. You're filming this with this character in it. And he's like, what? And well, we need toys. So a lot of that's driven not by storytelling, but by, the dollar for the
Commercial, yeah.
toys. And unfortunately, because people see that, right? And most novelists today see that and they are storytellers and like, oh, that's how you're supposed to do it. I'll just
They're
do that right or
influenced,
whatever.
yeah.
Yeah, they're influenced by it. And so you end up with a lot of books and TV shows and movies where you're just like, I don't know what's going on because there's 19 characters here and I don't care about any of them.
Yeah.
And so, so you get like, Spider-Man 3 where it's like Venom and Sandman are the villains and Harry Osborn's Green Goblin is the villain. And you're like, I don't want any of that. I just wanted Harry to be in there. And then you get Batman and you're like, what? By the time it becomes Batman and Robin, it's like Mr. Freeze and Bane and Poison Ivy and, I don't even know who else. And so it's like, yeah.
Wait, was that a bad movie?
Um,
Batman and Robin?
I mean, it
I
made
mean,
$200 million, but
I thought it won a couple of Oscars and
it might
It's got
have.
Arnold
It's a cult
Schwarzenegger in
classic.
it. Okay.
Everyone free.
Nice to meet you, Batman.
And so what happens is if it's not a financial decision because they want toys, then it's the storyteller grasping for how to raise the stakes. How do I make this a bigger deal? He's already saved the planet, so I'll just throw more bad guys at him. Or he's already saved the universe, so I'll just throw more bad guys at him. Because they're
Jeffrey,
confusing.
this is such a good point. I mean, keep talking, but
No. Yeah,
you are
they're
so
confusing.
right. You are so right.
Yeah, they're confusing danger with stakes, and you have to. Stakes can be personal or they can be impersonal, but you can raise the stakes without raising the number of bad guys. You can raise, and you can also raise the number of bad guys without raising the stakes. Having more bad guys does not mean it's more dangerous. It just means there's a lot more going on screen.
Yeah, Spider-Man 2
and
versus
so,
3.
yeah.
You know, like Spider-Man 2,
Yeah,
there's so many
yeah.
stakes being raised. You know, you think about that scene
Constantly.
of Peter Parker trying to stop the train, right? And you're just like,
Yeah.
this is all with Doc Ock, right? This is all that. And then you think about 3, and you're like, oh man, just
Yeah, right. Oh, he's trying to find the ring. Those are some mistakes. You know, so yeah. So I mean, you might even think, Chris, that I do this for a living.
Well, you know, it's strange. It's rare that I hadn't thought of a point before I hear it when it comes to writing stuff. But that I don't typically consider that much about what makes bad writing. I try to think about what makes good writing. But you know, the motivation of the writer who puts in multiple villains. I hadn't really considered that before, and it's such a smart point that it's these writers who don't know how to craft a high stakes narrative. And so they just like, you know what, I'll just put in another bad guy. I mean, it's such it makes so much sense now that I think about it, but it's so counterintuitive to me because it's not how I would think to raise the stakes. And really, to me, a great action film or a great story with an adventure and a hero and a villain and that kind of story, it all kind of begins, it doesn't necessarily begin with a villain. You can come up with the hero first, but it all hinges on the villain's story, really. Because if you have a villain, you need them to have some kind of very strong motivation and very insidious intention. If you have a strong motivation for the villain and insidious intention, and you know something's bad's going to happen if they get their way, if the thing that they want to happen happens, then the hero does have to stop them, or the hero does have to in some way succeed. And you know, that's what makes stakes. That's what makes stakes high and people engaged. And so that, to me, just the writing of the villain story is such a specific art within the art of writing a good story generally. And it does seem to be something that, for whatever reason, bafflingly, Hollywood writers have seemed to have lost the ability to do effectively, which is bizarre to me. And everything hinges on that damn villain story. And it doesn't make any sense to me to have a crappy villain story and then just throw in more villains. Like, oh, let's just
I'm going to
throw in some more
venture
villains.
a tiny little bit into politics, which is, I know your domain, Chris. A tiny little bit.
Yeah.
You can't have a villain if they're not evil.
Mm-hmm.
And Hollywood doesn't know what evil is.
Oh,
Because to
you know
them,
what? Another
evil
excellent
is
point.
just a misunderstood person who was wounded as a child, and therefore they have become evil.
Well, they
and
are actually. Sorry, continue.
No, I was just saying, the last great villain I saw in Hollywood was the Joker, right?
Yep.
The original Joker, Heath Ledger. You know, not the original Joker, but Heath Ledger's Joker.
A portrayal
he was
of the original Joker.
Yeah, portrayal. Yeah, and you know, going along with superhero movies, because that's kind of my thing. I love the Vulture in the Spider-Man: Homecoming. I don't know if I'd classify him as evil, but he was certainly, he was evil because he was willing to let other people die for his gain. So, but when you think that every single person who's evil is actually just misunderstood, you can't write a real villain, and you can't write a real hero.
Yeah, they don't really like to say somebody's evil anymore. You know, they want to just say this person's misunderstood, and then everybody like gets along at the end of the movie or something. It's bizarre how you're 100% right, and that stems from this desire, I think, and this is a kind of heavy thing, I actually think, which we probably shouldn't get into, but I think that Hollywood to some degree is trying to change how Americans perceive morality, right? Like pretending you're a woman isn't weird, it's perfectly normal, you know, that kind of thing. And so there is this desire to craft the culture, to craft what morality is. And to some degree, I think a lot of people in Hollywood, and I think this goes to the politics of traditional Christian values versus progressive atheist values without any kind of, without any kind of foundation of, our Western traditions, Christianity, that kind of thing. Because even if you're an atheist, you can respect traditional Christian values that developed Western civilization, I think. But there is a kind of desire to say, well, no, there is no good, there is no evil, there's just my truth, or some
shades of gray
BS like that. Yeah. And that push, I think, is informing a lot of these decisions to write villains in this way.
It's that agenda, though. Instead of it being about a character, and you kind of really got it about. It's not about characters being evil. It's about them being misunderstood. That's how they're doing it. They're just saying, okay, let's take this character that's going to start off as a villain and then turn it into our own personal morality tale of how people are just misunderstood, and if we only listened to them, we wouldn't hate them, we wouldn't not like them or not understand them. You know, we just gotta listen to their story. And
Cruella is like this, right? Cruella is like,
yeah,
was this originally this villain that wanted to murder puppies?
She did.
You don't want it. You don't get worse than a puppy murderer.
She skinned puppies for her clothing, and then she wanted to skin more puppies for more clothing.
Exactly. And then they're like, let's make that the hero of a movie. The puppy murderer.
There's a great YouTube channel called Perch, Perch, and he talks about the comic book industry. And you can see this happening in the comic book industry right now. Mm-hmm. And one of the things he was talking about how is the problem with comic books is there's no more villains. The villains are social injustice or racism or whatever. Mm-hmm. There's no more good villains for the heroes to fight. But you only know what heroism is if you have, evil villains to fight. If your heroes just stand around talking all day long. I was at the library with my daughter, who wants to be a comic book writer / artist, and she's an amazing artist. And I was telling her, okay, here's the comics you want to look at. You want to look at John Byrne's run on the X-Men. You want to look at Chris Claremont's run on the X-Men. You want to look at Peter David's run on Spider-Man. And she's like, well, what about this comic? And she pulled one off that was made in the last 5 years. And I'm like, I can guarantee you, I can tell you what this comic is going to look like before you even open it. It's going to be wall-to-wall dialogue. And sure enough, we open it up, and it is wall-to-wall dialogue, because comic storytelling is a collaborative medium, right? When you're filming a movie or writing a book or a comic book, you only have so much say over how the audience is going to interpret it. It's why you have those film critics who are always like, "Oh, and then this scene meant," and you're like, "I didn't do that when I was making it, but okay, sure." But in order for the people reading it or watching it to know exactly what you mean, you have to tell them exactly what you mean. And in comics, that means dialogue. And that's the last thing you want a lot of in comics. And in movies, that means dialogue. And that's the last thing you want in movies. Not do you want no dialogue, but a movie is a movie is a story told with pictures.
Especially
not
with
a
the comic
story told with
films,
dialogue. Yeah.
Comic films are really meant to be more about the Flash, right? It's immediate, like, obviously there's dialogue in there and there's character development through the words spoken, but it's also a lot of action set pieces and major things. So when your main focus and your main messaging is being put through in these diatribes, then yeah, it's going to have a negative impact.
Yeah, and it's important. It's important to point out here that a main character and a primary protagonist is only as good as the obstacles with which he's faced and has to overcome. And the primary obstacle in any good story is always the main antagonist. And when you have a situation where you're stacking in villain after villain after villain into a story, you're actually doing a big disservice not just to the protagonist of your story, because he's got so many of these thin villains and shallow challenges he's got to overcome, but you're also doing a disservice to your antagonists because you're not able to devote enough time and energy into developing them. Odin, did you have any thoughts on the too many villains trope?
Yeah, the immediate thing that comes to mind is Amazing Spider-Man 2. And because the other issue that comes up with it is you have the character like Rhino, where it's not even just that you have too many, it's just that some of the actual villains just become throwaways. Like they become completely worthless.
The best scene in the movie was the last scene.
They somehow had Paul Giamatti being a character in a movie, and he was worthless.
Yeah, he was terrible too. Written by Alex Kurtzman, by the way. But yeah, in that movie, you had like Electro, you had Rhino, you had the Green Goblin. I think at the end, what was it? Doc Ock showed up.
And they ruined the Gwen moment. They ruined it.
Yeah.
And they ruined it because what they did is they switched it from, he just wasn't fast enough, to he actually, they switched it from he actually killed her to he wasn't fast enough. Mm-hmm. Goblin threw her off the bridge in the comic book, but Pete webbing her snapped her neck. And in the Amazing Spider-Man movie, spoiler alert for however many year old movie it is, he's just not fast enough and she hits the ground before he can.
No. He hit her with the web and broke her back.
They slow-moed it. He hit her with the web, but she's still going because there's elasticity on the web, and her head hits the ground, and then she pops back up. So it was like they removed a lot of the impact of that scene, how it was in the original story, to do something differently. And I see it a lot in movies where they essentially they're taking away the choice that the characters make to just have things happen, and that's.
But I don't know. Look, I mean, you gotta accept that clearly had something to do with the fact that they were going to be showing this to children, and they were just like. I
read the original comic when I was a kid.
No, I'm not saying it was the right choice. I like the sort of bold choice, and I remember when that happened. I remember thinking exactly what you're saying. I mean, I remember thinking like, this is a mistake. You need to stay true to a story that is that compelling and that impactful, and it was a mistake not to go with that. But I mean, I totally understand why a movie producer would be like, we can't show kids this. I mean, it's the wrong choice, but I don't think the reason for that choice was necessarily a bad reason. I think that you do sometimes have to soften things for children and things like. I understand that.
All right,
Jeffrey. So I mean, you have like 16 kids, right? So
4 and 1 in the oven. But I mean, they've all watched all the Marvel movies and Star Wars.
Yeah, they watched the first 5 minutes of Up. I'm sure they're fine.
Yeah. My kids,
if they can survive that, they can survive anything.
I showed all my kids like all the real movies, and so they all, they just watched Bill
Predator,
and Ted's Excellent Adventure last week.
Yeah.
So if they can get through that, they can get through anything.
Excellent.
Bill and Ted's is great.
All right, guys. So moving on, let's talk about the third mistake, which is rehashing the original story. So essentially, this is remaking the original film as the sequel and hoping that the formula pleases the audience, when what we're really getting is basically the exact same story told over and over again, a la The Force Awakens. So, Chris, I know you have a lot to say about this. So,
okay, thank you, sir.
So I just want to say,
no, I was so angry. So many people like The Force Awakens. So many nerds love The Force Awakens. I hear it on like Clownfish. I hear these guys talking about how much they like Force Awakens, and then they were disappointed in the second film, right? In the whatever
Last Jedi,
I think. No, I'm sorry. Force Awakens was total effing garbage. Absolute garbage. I remember watching that in the theater. 3 things pissed me off. 1, the Mary Sue Ray character. I was just like, what the F? What is this bullcrap? 2, they killed Han. Spoiler alert. They killed Han. I was just like, seriously? You're going to... I mean, the whole reason I'm watching this is for Han Solo and Luke Skywalker and Leia, you morons. You killed one of the characters I'm watching this for in the first movie? Like, the hell's wrong with you guys? Of course, but the thing that pissed me off the most was that I did not get a new story. I got a new Luke Skywalker. I got a new Obi-Wan with Han Solo.
I would argue you did not get a new Luke Skywalker.
Huh?
I would argue that you did not get a new Luke Skywalker. Luke made decisions.
That was what they were trying to do.
Yeah.
That was what they were trying to do. I mean, she comes from a desert planet. She's the new chosen one, whatever. And then we get a new Death Star. Oh, sorry, Death Planet. Totally different.
Well, she's not a Luke. She's a Rey Skywalker.
Not
yeah.
She's British.
Way off there. But no. They just copied the first movie. The first movie. And I'm watching this. I'm like, they copied the first Star Wars. Like, I wanted a new story. What are they doing? This is supposed to be a continuation of what happened before. This is not supposed to be a recycling. And so many people were like, no, you don't get it. Like, history repeats itself and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I don't care if history repeats. I don't care about any of that. A good writer is going to give me a new, interesting, phenomenal story set in the same world. They're not going to rehash the same GD story over and over again. There is one franchise that did this well, which is Back to the Future. Mm-hmm. Back to the Future did sort of repeat a lot of elements in the first movie, the second movie, and the third movie. And in fact, the third movie was almost, well, not quite, but there was a lot of repeated stuff from the third movie in the first movie. But the way they did it was so good, and they were so charming, and everything they did worked so cleanly that you didn't care, and it was also a time travel movie, so the setting was so different. It was like everything about that series was,
and it didn't take itself too seriously either.
It didn't take itself too seriously.
Yeah.
They knew we were kind of in on the joke,
Yeah.
With Star Wars, it was like they were trying to seriously. It was like they did like they looked at another picture, copied it, and then tried to pass it off as a new picture. No, you just redrew the same friggin' thing that this other guy drew before, and you're pretending it's something different. It's the same damn thing. I don't know. Sorry, I really, really hated Force Awakens.
Yeah, there's this thing, and Jeff will probably know about this a little bit, where in the novel writing sphere, where you're writing long series, fans like stuff that's similar but different. This kind of goes to the Back to the Future thing, where it has a formula that it follows, but it changes it enough to keep it fresh and interesting. Whereas something like The Force Awakens, it was literally beat for beat A New Hope, just retold.
Here's the thing I thought about A New Hope. I thought he was doing it that way on purpose to show people, like, listen, I know what Star Wars is. And then the second and third movie will be wildly different, right? I didn't realize that the second movie was going to be a beat for beat remake of Empire, but with ripping out all the moments that mattered. And I couldn't even watch the third movie. I couldn't get through it. So I thought that's what he was doing. Like, listen, everybody, look, I know what Star Wars is. I know what it looks like. I know what it sounds like. I know what it feels like. And then I'm going to fix all of these problems that I created in this story in the second one, because it's a trilogy. That's what I thought. Because Lawrence Kasdan was the one who wrote Force Awakens with JJ. Yeah. I didn't realize then they later threw out Lawrence's scripts and wrote their own. So hold my beer kind of thing with Ryan. But the thing is in order to I remember watching the original sequel to Lethal Weapon, right? You guys remember Lethal Weapon?
Yeah, Lethal Weapon.
Yeah, I remember watching the sequel to Lethal Weapon and walking out of the theaters going, they just remade the first movie. That's all they did. I mean, I like the characters enough that it was enjoyable, but they just remade the first movie. And that was how Hollywood used to be constantly. There was never an original sequel, with the exception of the Star Trek movies. Because you had the original Star Trek movie that came out in the 70s that was boring as hell, but beautiful. And then you had Star Trek The Wrath of Khan, which was a wildly different movie. And then you had Star Trek 3, wildly different movie. And then Star Trek 4, wildly different movie. Yeah. But they all tied into each other with the same characters, but different tones. And I always thought that was the way to do a sequel. Same characters, same universe.
I actually think it's tough I think it's tough to write a different story that's just as good as the first story. I mean, it just is. It's just harder. And so that is why I think these producers, they say to the writer, look, just fall back on what you did before, just play it safe, because it is a risk. I mean, if you look at some of the sequels from the 80s that did diverge significantly from the original story, like say Beverly Hills Cop 2, and then Beverly Hills Cop 3, they just got progressively worse. I mean, it just would... And they used to do that all the time. I think Home Alone had a sequel, Lost in New York, and then I think there was another sequel with like a new kid or something. I might be wrong about that. But.
Oh yeah, number 3. It was new kid, new villains. One of the villains was I forget his name. That's a whole other thing.
But I heard about it.
They basically violated every rule we're going through.
Yes, exactly.
In the show.
I see this a lot in books, and I think the genesis of the problem is if you don't know why people liked your story in the first place, you're never going to be able to write another story that people like that isn't a copy of what you just did. You have to know why people like your story. And you get people who think that people like their story for the wrong reason, and then in the sequel, all the wrong things are there. And you're like, no, that's not why I like this character. I just want to see Han Solo again. What do you mean?
Well, the original Star Wars trilogy, we kind of were not thinking about it like this, but it was, a movie and 2 sequels, and those 2 sequels were drastically different than the original film.
Yeah,
drastically. Obviously, I remember. Return of the Jedi still had a Death Star, a new Death Star, but there were some elements that were repeated. But I mean, what was really, when I was a kid, I remember thinking like, this is how I want to write stories. Like, I love the fact they had a desert planet in the first one, a forest planet, and ice planet in the second one, a forest planet and a swamp. Swamp in the second one and the third one, obviously, with Yoda. And, then they have the Death Star, which is a very sort of cold, metallic environment. And they had all these different environments that were just beautiful and interesting and distinct. And so even if you're repeating a story element or something like that, and obviously you're seeing the same characters over and over again, there is enough variety visually in what you're looking at and everything that it is very compelling and very striking and very interesting and very different. My brother keeps trying to call me. Love my brother, but I'm hanging up.
So, Chris, I wanted to hop over to Odin. Odin, what do you think about the whole rehashing the original story thing?
No, I think it's one of those things where it can be done. Like, I think that's kind of the point that has been made so far, is that it can be done well, but it's often not. And the series that I think about, like, so obviously Back to the Future was one that we both, I think all of us kind of agree that we enjoyed a lot. I recently got into a lot of Japanese cinema, and so I've been watching this franchise called the Zatoichi franchise.
The Blind Swordsman.
Yeah, and so Blind Swordsman. And one of the things about the Zatoichi franchise is that they are almost all the same as far as their structure of him coming into a town or to an area, getting into trouble, having to save somebody, but they're all different enough that you just love it. His character is continuously growing to the point of him first saying that he's not worthy of love and then finding out that he is in some ways worthy. And so you're able to have that type of differentiation. And that, I think, is kind of the important thing, is that if you're going to have a story that's going to be very similar in beats, because maybe it has to be because of the universe you're building, there have to be enough differences. And those differences have to be enough to be able to not only get the original audience to remain interested in the story, but then also to bring new audiences in as well, to say, oh, okay, so these are elements that I think I remember hearing about from other people, but these seem to also have some differences that I think are worth talking about as well. So that sense of differentiation, I think, is very important, where you can have similar beats, but you got to have at least some things that are different, and they have to be good as well.
At the end of the day, just write a good story.
Exactly.
Just write good original stories. I mean, that's
I think when you sit down to craft a sequel, it's important to remember the similar but different things. So you want to keep the stuff that resonated with the audience from the first one, carry it over, but also kind of expand upon it. And you got to advance a new narrative that has an impact on both the characters in the story and the world that the characters inhabit. So you always want to be kind of like progressing, which is one of the reasons why I hate prequels. But Odin, I know you have to get going. Why don't you tell everyone where they can find out more about you?
Yeah, I was going to say one last thing about that too, is that I think the best things about, if you're going to do a story that way, the best things about it have to be the differences. You know, because a lot of sequels, I think, when they rehash the same things, they think, oh, this killed in the first movie, let's do it again. And then it doesn't, because the people who have seen it the first time are like, oh, I've seen this joke before, or I've seen this play out before, this is not as interesting. And so when you're having those differences in there, they have to be the things that really land and drive the story. And that's where you can add in elements of essentially fan service, where it's like, let's dabble in. Basically, you don't want to have an entire, maybe some people do, but you don't want to have an entire tray of sprinkles, right? You want to have a cake. And then you put the sprinkles on top, and the sprinkles should be the, hey, here's the fan service, right? We're to sprinkle it on top, make it delicious, make it, a little bit of extra special, because you're going to, it's going to be somewhat familiar, but you want to have yourself a nice, solid cake foundation underneath it.
Yeah, the Star Wars sequels are, they thought of the sprinkles first and then thought of the cake afterwards.
It was all sprinkles.
Sprinkles. No, but they were trying, they said, okay, what is the fan service we want to present?
They took a piece of poop.
They were like,
and put sprinkles on top of it. That's what
the poop was 20 years old and just decrepit. Yeah,
I love this metaphor again.
Yeah, but still wet and stinky. So Odin, it's getting past his bedtime, so he has to get out of here. Why don't you tell people where they can find out more about you, and where they can check out your channels?
Yeah, check me out over at OMB Reviews on YouTube. I'm also over on Odyssey as well. And I also upload my videos to minds.com. When they allow me to upload my videos, there's been a couple of mornings where their system's just been like, cannot compute, but most mornings I can upload them there too. I like to, diversify my stuff. But yeah, OMB Reviews is my main channel, and then I do have a political channel called the OMB Report, which was demonetized months ago, and again, YouTube has been crazy.
How dare you tell the truth?
Yeah, how dare I?
Odin, it was awesome meeting you, and I am now subscribed to your stuff, so I shall.
Yeah, me too. Odin, I will be
subscribing
and checking you out.
And shout out to Matthew Case for inviting me on, and to all of these lovely people for having some good
also be sure to check out Odin on Friday Night Tights, which he does every week. He's one of the YouTube elite over there on that live stream.
That sounds like something superheroes would be involved in.
If you ever need the quiet one that reads the chat. That's what my main thing is.
If you ever need a superhero author on the show, let me know.
Absolutely, will do.
Friday Night Tights sounds to me like a lot of men dressed as women.
One day we'll have to actually wear tights. Because
it's a dancing troupe. That's what it is. All right, Odin, thank you so much for coming.
Y'all have a wonderful
sharing
night.
your critical thoughts with us, and say hi to your family for me.
I will.
Nice to meet you.
Much love.
Take care, buddy. Oops.
Uh-oh.
I accidentally booted Jeff.
Get out, buddy.
I've seen you in a couple of months. I'll get you back if you move.
Yeah, I know, right? All right, so we've covered 3 of the big sequel mistakes so far. So let's tackle the 4th one, which is changing the story far too drastically. And this is kind of the opposite of rehashing the original story, which is taking the story in such an extreme different direction that it actually alienates fans of the original story. So, Jeff, what do you have to say about this one?
Well, what's interesting is thinking about this because there's a lot of subjectiveness in here, right? There's not, storytelling is very subjective, but it's also can be very objective. And it's understanding, most of it is just understanding what people liked in your story to begin with, because that's really critical. If you don't understand what people liked, you're not going to be able to recreate that. And one of my examples, I know you put Highlander 2 in our show notes, and that's obviously, like, I went to the theater as a kid to watch Highlander 2, and I'm like, what am I watching? What movie is this?
That's the perfect example of this one.
Yeah, it really is. But I'm going to say something a little controversial. I feel like John Wick 2 really failed at that. I feel like they took all the things that I liked about John Wick 1, and it might just be that these are the things that I liked, and they got rid of them. And in John Wick 2, he's just an assassin assassinating people, and he gets caught up in something, and some people die, and it's just like a regular thriller with a guy who's like a kind of a good shot, because in the first movie, if you watch it, he never actually misses. And everything is very, very precise. And that really spoke to me as someone who's in the Army and who writes about a lot of this stuff. It was really, really cool to watch these guys use real-world tactics and strategies in gunfights in a movie. And then in John Wick 2, it's like there's a scene where he's like running through the mall, shooting behind him, and he doesn't know where those bullets are going. And I kind of felt like, for me, they lost me in the sequels because of that. Now, granted, John Wick 2 and John Wick 3 are incredibly popular movies, and people love them. And it's not like I thought it was bad because of that. I just would have liked them if they had kept that part of the first movie that I liked so much. And same thing with Highlander. I mean, they could have found a way to give us more. I mean, look at the TV show. The TV show with Duncan the Club was awesome. At least I thought it was. I haven't watched it in 20 years, so maybe it would suck. I don't know. It would suck now, but
I loved it when I was a kid, man.
Yeah, me too. And so the interesting thing is about those sequels that just go too far. I usually find that either A, written by somebody else entirely, or B, goes back to the whole thing of they just didn't know why the first one was popular and they didn't know what to do with the sequel, so they just usually like the sequel to Ender's Game, which was Speaker for the Dead. They just took another manuscript and changed the names and made that movie.
True.
Yeah, the book, right?
Die Hard.
Yeah, with the book they did that with Die Hard too, right? Die Hard, the original Die Hard was based on a book, and so was the sequel. They were just 2 different books with 2 different characters. And the book, in Speaker for the Dead, it would suck to write Ender's Game as your first novel. And I feel really bad for him, because how do you top one of the greatest novels ever written as your first friggin' book when you're 22 years old? It's just like, where does your career even go from there? And so he had these other books he had written that he wanted to publish, and they're like, no, we want a sequel to Ender's Game. And so he just went in and changed the name of the characters to Speaker for the Dead to match Ender, and gave it to them, and they loved it. And same thing with Xenophobe. So it's just, it is tough to write a sequel that's new and different, but maintains what people love about the character. So, but it requires you to, again, and this kind of goes back to this, to know what people liked about the book, movie, and character, and then not change that thing.
Yeah, Chris, what do you think about changing stuff too drastically? Can you think of any good examples of that?
Yeah, I mean, look, I actually think that Highlander is a bad example, and I think that the sequel to Ender's Game is a bad example. And the reason I think these are bad examples is because these are not really sequels. These are, so like I was saying at the beginning of the show, you can really do anything you want if you stay within the world of the original story, if you maintain the integrity of that world. Highlander 2 was set in a completely different universe, basically, than the first movie. They didn't follow the same rules of the first movie. It became some kind of weird sci-fi thing where there were aliens and all this weird stuff. I don't know. Keep it on the big thing. I want to see you guys' reactions to me saying rubbish.
No, you're right on. You're absolutely right. I hadn't thought about it that way.
if you can maintain the world of the original film, you can change really anything you want. You can go completely crazy. I wrote, as a kind of thought experiment, I wrote a Justice League movie that I thought would be cool, long before they ever were even thinking about doing a Justice League movie.
You were Zack Snyder before Zack Snyder.
Right. Well, I mean, I knew they were going to do an Avengers movie, and I thought, well, when they do an Avengers movie, DC is going to say, well, you need to do a Justice League movie. So
that's exactly how that conversation went, too.
yeah. So me and my buddy just did a think-through version, and our story was involved a time traveler who went and picked up all the superheroes from their very original origin. So they picked up Superman in, 1939? I think that's when he first appeared. They picked up all the superheroes in their first comic incarnation, and then bring them to the future where there's this terrible threat. And so you've got all these superheroes that are very young, that, because in the world of the movie that I had developed, the superheroes were all killed off by this villain. And so somebody goes, we need to go get them from back in time. So they go grab them all in their original incarnation, and then all at once have to fight this villain. And of course they beat him and they win and everything like that, which is kind of an interesting idea for a Justice League movie, I thought. And then we thought, okay, well, what if we did a sequel? Well, how would we do that? And I said, well, you can't top that, because you brought in all the Justice League. They're fighting this ultimate villain, and it was like the most. You can't beat it. So what do? You go smaller and more intimate, right? And so I did a much different kind of sequel in my head. Well, again, this is just like we knew we were never going to
thought experiment.
Yeah. So for the second film, I thought, well, what if Lex Luthor figures out how to put some particle in the atmosphere that it eliminates all the superheroes' superpowers. And so all the superheroes have no superpowers, and they have to fight supervillains without superpowers. I was like, well, their leader would have to be Batman, wouldn't it? And so all the superheroes from the DC universe that don't have actual superpowers, those would be sort of the leaders, and the ones with superpowers would now be the sort of like low-level superheroes, because they don't know how to fight without superpowers, right? So I thought that's a really interesting dynamic as well. So I did go from like one extreme, let's fight the most vicious villain in comic book history, to this concept of like, well, let's go smaller and like actually take away all their superpowers. And to me, one of those side stories would be Superman as Clark Kent having to reconcile the fact that he has no powers. And he was the redemption character. He was actually the character that gets to beat a bad guy despite the fact he's just a man now. And so that to me was a very sort of like emotional story and a good story to bring in. But these are completely different stories.
Yeah.
But they're totally set within the same world.
Yeah, I want to go back to like Highlander for a minute, because to me that's like the most egregious example of this changing the story too drastically, where basically you switch genres between Highlander 1 and Highlander 2, because Highlander 1 was, urban fantasy, high fantasy, and then Highlander 2 straight up science fiction. Like in the original incarnation of that movie, the Highlanders were aliens from a different planet that were sent to Earth as punishment. And so like it was just such a radical departure from what
such
people
a punishment
loved
to be immortal and to heal and
well to fight each other to the death until there's only one. Something like a little bit more kind of common, I think, is something where you have like The Last Jedi, where the tone shift and the handling of characters was so radically different from everything that had come before that it created a schism within the fan base where, like, that's not my Luke Skywalker. The tone is very like kind of nihilistic and kind of goes against like this whole idea of redemption and family and stuff like that. It was meant to subvert expectations as opposed to, inspiring people or being like a morality tale like the originals or the story of a family, something like that. So the danger of changing the story too drastically, it doesn't have to be something that's like earth-shattering. It could just be a betrayal of what was special about the first one to begin with.
Well, I would disagree a little bit with the idea that you're just changing the story too drastically or changing the genre. I think you can actually get away with that. The real issue here is you are not maintaining the integrity of the first film. You're not following the rules you set in the first movie. You're actually breaking the rules. You're violating the trust of your audience because you said, this is the world we live in. These are the rules that I've set up that we're going to work. And then the next film goes, let's throw that lightsaber away. F it, And Kingdom of the Crystal Skull did this as well. King of the Crystal Skull was a genre change. But again, it wasn't just a genre change. It was a violation of everything that we had expected to see. In Temple of Doom, that was a major shift. A major shift. And yet people still believe it's in the world of Indiana Jones. People still love that movie. I think it's the worst of the three movies because I didn't like the dark tone of that film. But I don't sit there and watch that film and think, no, this doesn't seem like it's in the same world.
And I like that you admitted there are only three movies.
No, there's only three.
Yeah, there's only three.
But
five now, movie,
right? No, just four. They're shooting the fourth one.
You know about that, Matthew, a little bit, don't you? About the fifth movie, a little bit.
No, fourth movie.
But that magic stuff that they had in the second movie, like I think it's tough to introduce magic and sorcery and shamanism and this kind of dark art stuff and Satanism, this kind of stuff, cultism, and then do sci-fi also. Like in the world of Indiana Jones, we have Nazis, but we also have sort of like the Christian God or the Jewish God with the Ark of the Covenant, and also with the Last Crusade. In the second movie, you have a sort of satanic cult. So you're in that
Shiva's not really a satanic cult. It's just a different religion.
Well, the thing about Indiana Jones was like the formula was always based around archaeology, and archaeology just happened to be involved directly with religion, and so you had religious mysticism as the central kind of fantasy element of the previous Indiana Jones. And when this mythical fourth movie that you speak about that I don't know anything about came along, George Lucas made the decision to make it more science fiction than fantasy again. And so like you had kind of the same formula, but it was so tonally different that it didn't really resonate with audiences as well as the originals.
And you know what you just made me realize by saying that he's switched from the religious aspects of the first three movies to the more science-based aspect of the mythical fourth movie that doesn't exist. He did the same thing with the flippin' midichlorian BS. I mean, have you guys seen his original short film or
THX 1138?
Yeah. So his early movies were basically all about Catholicism. I mean, you watch those movies; it was a sort of critique of Catholicism. And then you watch the Indiana Jones movies and the original Star Wars movies, and like, I don't know how much that was about Christianity or Judaism or whatever, but like, may the Force be with you is may God be with you. I mean, that's what that is. Like, people don't believe in the Force in those original films, and they're like, no, the Force is real. And it's like saying God is real, right? It's I don't know if it's an advocacy of religion, but it's definitely a sort of like playing with
wasn't a lot of the terms and stuff like Judaism? They used a lot of Judaism ideas in the Force.
And Christianity, yeah. I feel like. And so the story was a kind of a story about Western religions and how we perceive religion in our modern world. And then he decided in the prequels, oh no, let's just forget about all that and make it some science-based midichlorian weird thing. And I maybe that has to do with George Lucas's evolving perception of religion himself. Maybe he just wanted to extract religion from those movies and put in this more science-based thing. And I don't think he really understood how much of a betrayal the fans felt that was to them and their view of the world of Star Wars.
I don't know if you've ever seen the making of
The Phantom Menace.
Phantom Menace, thank you. But there's it's really great. There's hours and hours of footage of it on YouTube, and there's this scene where he's standing in this room.
Can't wait to watch none of that.
He's got a storyboard. George Lucas has got the storyboard up, and this is not like a recreation. This is actual footage. And at the beginning, in the middle of this, there's all these characters on the storyboard. And in the middle is Jar Jar Binks. And he points at Jar Jar Binks and he says, he's the key. If the fans will buy him, the whole movie works. And I'm like,
yeah.
What?
Hindsight is 2020.
Yeah.
Well, like the whole midichlorian thing, I think George Lucas was going through a phase where he felt like he needed to explain elements of this world, and he looked at it as world building, where it's like, because he had conceived like a whole sequel trilogy as well that had to do with like the wiles or the wills of the Force and stuff like that, and so like he had come up with this whole elaborate kind of like how the Force works, basically. Like he developed his magic system, and he failed to realize that part of what made the Force so iconic and so special to so many people is that it was vague, that you could kind of like project what you wanted it to be in there. And in a way, it actually that works against it in the sequel trilogy that we got, because with J.J. Abrams, it's just like, oh, the Force can do anything. It doesn't matter. Like there are no rules. It's just a Deus ex machina from beginning to end. And George actually, like he kind of had the same mentality, but he wanted to have reasons why it did that stuff, and neither of them worked.
But it is a rejection. It is a rejection of the original intention. The original intention was clearly to make it a metaphor for the religions that we have in our own world. I mean, may the Force be with you is may God be with you. That's something that Catholics, that's something my grandparents used to say. I mean, that's something that used to be said. We don't say may God be with you anymore, and I think the reason is because it sounds too much like may the Force be with you, which has actually overcome may God be with you in the popular culture. But people used to say very commonly when I was a kid, may God be with you, because may the Force be with you. That's become the main thing now. We don't say it.
And even though the Jedi are kind of compared to samurais, they're actually kind of more taken after the warrior monks.
Yeah,
or
Crusader Knights. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's another thing too. The whole like, oh, Jedi's cannot have emotion. Jedi's cannot love. What the hell are you fighting for then?
The prequels wrecked a lot about the original movies, I felt like. And no, I love the medieval aspect. The princess, the squire, all those kind of references. In fact, I think it was either Star Wars or Empire, I can't remember which, where George Lucas actually brought in this short film, this medieval short film. Do you guys know about this? He actually played, before the movie, this medieval short film, and his idea was, we're going to get people in this mindset of thinking about, medieval Europe and knights and chivalry, right? I mean, the lightsaber. I mean, a lot of this stuff was taken from, I don't like that people go, oh, it's a Western in space. Oh, it's a dogfight in space. Oh, it's a samurai movie. I hate all of that, because to me, when I was a child, originally it was a film about medieval Europe and those values and that kind of the idea of honor and all that kind of stuff from medieval Europe. And I don't like that people were trying to add in other things. Of course there was dogfight elements. Of course there were Western elements with Han Solo and that kind of stuff.
I never thought of it as a Western. That's the first time I've ever heard anybody describe it as a Western.
Yeah, well, I mean, Han Solo is like a cowboy.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I always thought of it like, just as it was.
Film analysts call it like a Western in space. A lot of people call it a Western in space.
So we actually have a comment here from Nick Clark where he says, what about Die Hard 5? And I think Die Hard is another good example of this, where from the third movie onward, they kind of abandoned the Die Hard formula, which is, someone trapped in a enclosed space facing overwhelming odds. And by the time you get to the fifth one, it just becomes so ridiculous. Like it takes place in Russia, and it's basically just like an action movie with Bruce Willis in it, who they call John McClane. They end up going to Chernobyl at the end and having like a big kind of like fight.
I saw it.
Yeah. It was terrible. And I think the Die Hard series, like, I kind of have a guilty pleasure for the second one, because it still kind of follows the same formula where he's trapped in an airport and stuff like that. But
the fire going up to hit the plane.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Can't possibly work in real life, but beautiful for the movie.
Exactly. So like, even though the second one has its problems, it still felt like a Die Hard movie. And then the third movie, which is arguably better than the sequel, the direct sequel, Die Harder, it strayed radically from the formula, but it still worked. But by that point, like they kind of been like, okay, we don't need to stick to the formula anymore, and the fourth and fifth one just weren't as good.
Well, they also
Samuel L. Jackson. The third one?
Yeah.
I mean, there's also
It's a good movie.
10 years between the third one and the fourth one. Now, I like Live Free or Die Hard. That's probably my favorite one other than the original. I really liked that. The action was very frenetic. It was very. It felt very visceral and real, and I like that in an action movie. And I like the character, and I like Bruce Willis, and I like the whole thing about it. So I like Live Free or Die Hard. But you're right. If you watch both those movies, but in Live Free or Die Hard, change the name of the character from John McClane to something else, you would never suspect that they were the same character.
I mean, I'm kind of with Gasso in the chat here, where he basically Indiana Jones 4's Die Hard 5. So the movie just doesn't exist. It's that bad.
No, Die Hard 5, I actually watched it in the theater, and I wanted my time back. I mean,
it's so bad.
I also don't like the actor that plays his son. I mean, he gets...
Jai Courtney.
Courtney. He gets a lot of roles.
He's a good-looking guy. I've seen him in real life, actually. not as good looking in real life as he is in the film, but anyway, but he's a good looking guy. You know, he's what you look at him and you think that guy could be an action hero for sure. Okay, he's got the jawline, everything. He's just not a charismatic guy, and I watch him and he's so bland. And this is a problem they have in Hollywood. They cast guys a lot of times who have the right look, or maybe some casting director's got a crush on him, or I don't know what the deal is. I don't know what it is, but occasionally they want to kind of force feed us an actor that they really want to be a star. And fans, I think people just in the public, we just watch these guys and we go, it's not going to happen, Hollywood. Stop trying to force this guy on us. We don't want him. We don't like him. We're not interested. But Hollywood for some reason gets these, I don't know. Gets like
I call it the Colin Farrell syndrome, because I mean
Colin Farrell was a charismatic guy.
Well, I'm not,
but
he
wasn't a leading man.
I'm not saying he was. Yeah. So Jeff's point is that, you know, Hollywood tries to push actors to be leading men sometimes, and like they were pushing Colin Farrell hard, and audience were just like, we don't like this guy. Like he's better as a character actor.
He's better with an Irish
Jeremy Renner. Yeah,
Jeremy Renner is the ultimate of this.
Yeah,
Jeremy Renner is the ultimate. Because I don't dislike Jeremy Renner in interviews. I actually like him in interviews. I think he's probably an awesome guy in real life.
And he's been in some good movies. Wind River.
And he's been in some great movies. But anytime they make him an action hero, I literally want to fall. I want to take a nap throughout the whole movie.
I'm a little bit biased because Jeremy Renner starred in my movie, and I was the one who pushed him to be a leading man before it was cool.
Is that right? Is that true?
Yeah, that is true.
Wow.
Yeah, IMDb me, The Outside Man. It's it was a short film that I did to try to get my feature film off the ground. Premiered at the Cannes Film Festival in 2004. It stars Jeremy Renner. I got to work with him.
Very cool.
Yeah, I got to work with him right after he was coming off of Dahmer. He had just
how is he in real life? Because I do feel like he would be a decent guy.
He's awesome. I love the guy. Like I never had a problem with him. He was a consummate professional, and when he blew up, I was like, this guy deserves.
Well, and that's a shame, because the thing is, like, I have to be objective, right? I have to look at his work as I see it, and I do find him incredibly difficult to watch in leading man roles. Now, that's not to say that he couldn't play anything. I mean, he is a decent actor. I mean, he is definitely competent. I believe him in whatever character he plays. But I don't find him charismatic enough to be a leading man. And
he's not.
As much as I don't want to say that about a great guy, because I think we need more awesome guys in Hollywood, in leading roles, doing great work. I just hate watching.
I will say this: did you ever watch the Bourne movie that he was in, The Bourne Identity?
Mm-hmm. That's actually specifically the movie I'm thinking of whenever I think of Jeremy Renner
being
a terrible lead.
I actually thought he was a great lead in that movie, but it was a bad movie because it strayed from it did one of the mistakes, which is you replace the main character, which was Matt Damon. So like I feel like Jeremy has done some not all the best career moves for him. Like I can remember I had lunch with him one time, and he was trying to decide whether he wanted to be Dracula in the movie Van Helsing or the bad guy in the movie SWAT, and he ended up going with SWAT. But it was kind of funny because when I had dinner with him, he'd just come from his Van Helsing audition, so he had white face paint and
that's very funny.
So getting back to the subject of this live stream, which is changing things too drastically, whether it's changing a character or changing the tone or changing the setting or the genre. Like if you change things too much, you're going to alienate the fans. And before we get to the last talking point that we have for this episode, I want to just let the chat know that if you guys have any questions for the panel, put them in the chat. We'll get to them after we finish this last talking point. And if you do super chats, it makes it easier. You go right to the front of the line. But you don't have to. We'll be scanning the chat for that as we go.
Hey, Matthew, can I say something real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm taking up the advice to interrupt. About the leading man thing, so people have an idea of what me and Chris are talking about and what you were talking about, is back in the old days of Hollywood, there was this actor, James Garner, one of the greatest actors, leading men of all time. Rockford Files, Maverick.
Yeah, I got to meet him a couple times.
Oh,
did you
jealous.
Really? I did, yeah.
Yeah, me too.
When he was 35, they put him in this war movie as the leading role, and the studio fought the director tooth and nail. Why? He's too young to be a leading man. And it's not that Jai Courtney can't be a leading man or the Jeremy Renner can't be a leading man or whatever. It's that Hollywood's pushing these leading men who are too young. I'm sorry, I'm 48. If you're 27, you are not an experienced operator who is someone I'm going to listen to. But if you're 35, yeah, I'll listen to you because you've been around a little bit, and you have time to learn that experience and have that position on the hierarchy. But, I think Hollywood's big problem with it is they're just pushing actors who are 23, 24, 25 to be leading men, and they just don't have the charisma that comes with age.
That's actually a really good point. Yeah, and I wouldn't say that that's impossible to have charisma at a young age, but as a rule, I think you're probably right.
I don't necessarily agree that charisma is necessary for leading man. I think what it comes down to is who do audiences resonate with, and charisma does have a part to play with that, but what you have is Hollywood pushing certain actors because they want them to be leading men and they want audiences to accept them. And then you have actors that audiences just naturally resonate with that go into that leading man role. Like, for instance, Brad Pitt. Brad Pitt was very young when he started his career, but because he played these quirky kind of side characters in these movies, people were like, oh, this guy's cool. And then by the time he started kind of breaking out into the leading man role, audiences were ready for him, as opposed to someone like Colin Farrell, who nobody actually ever really liked, but Hollywood was really pushing him hard to be like the next big thing.
Well, Brad was almost 30 when he broke out, though, as leading man. That's the thing. Brad Pitt. He was almost 30.
He could have done that earlier. The only reason he didn't is because he was like, I want to be taken seriously as an actor. So he did all these independent films. But no. I kind of disagree. I think charisma is absolutely critical to be. I mean, you look at all the old timey big deal actors, right? You look at Harrison Ford, right? You look at Tom Cruise. You look at these like big time actors historically. They were all like, they were all just like overflowing with charisma. James Garner is one of the best, literally one of the best ever.
But that's part of the audience naturally resonating with those actors and bringing them to the forefront.
Right, but to have okay, I'll give you an example. Like Christian Bale, a lot of guys, they brought him in for Batman, which is actually fine because Batman has a ton of charisma on its own as a character. So you don't necessarily need a guy with a ton of charisma bringing in his own personality. I mean, obviously Michael Keaton did a great job. He has tons of charisma. But you bring in somebody that's a little bit more bland like Christian Bale. Christian Bale takes all the charisma that he might have in real life out of his performances and tries to encapsulate the character, which I think is terrible because nobody goes and watches a movie because Christian Bale is in it. They watch a movie because it's... No, you don't. Nobody watches it. Why would you watch a movie? Well, you're wrong.
There's some actors who are like Jean-Claude Van Damme. I'll watch anything Jean-Claude Van Damme.
Yeah, but Jean-Claude Van Damme is charismatic.
Yeah.
Christian Bale isn't charismatic. He's just cardboard.
He's a great actor. I love watching
him.
Well,
that's the thing. Industry people will watch great actors. The regular public will watch charismatic actors. There's a big difference between industry people and the general public.
It's why the movies that win all the awards are movies that rarely people see.
Nobody cares to see. Yeah, exactly. And I understand that impulse to go see a great actor, Daniel Day-Lewis. Hollywood loves Daniel Day-Lewis. How many regular movie watchers go to see a movie because Daniel Day-Lewis is in it? Let me tell you, flipping zero. Okay.
But how many people go to see a movie because The Rock is in it?
Exactly. Also, Daniel Day-Lewis hasn't been in a movie in quite a long time. So.
No, he quit after the Seamstress movie or whatever the hell.
All right,
but The Rock, you're right. That's a great comparison. The Rock.
The Rock, very charismatic. I'm not saying that charisma doesn't play a part. I'm just saying that it's not necessary for a leading man role to take place.
Well, I mean, that's what a leading man is charisma. I mean, that's what it is. Okay, here's an example. I know you want to get this other topic, Matthew, and I promise.
Chris and Jeffrey are just beating up on Matthew today.
So look at it this way. One of the least, I love this guy. So if you are by chance watching, sir, I don't mean this in a bad way.
Okay.
But the man who can do the most with the least words is Keanu Reeves. Dude has buckets of on-screen charisma as long as he's not talking. Because he's not a great actor. I mean, nobody's going to say Keanu Reeves is a great actor.
No.
But he is a leading man, without a doubt.
He's a charismatic guy. Yeah.
He's a charismatic leading man, just not a great actor. You can be a great actor and not be able to be a leading man because you lack charisma. But you can't be a leading man unless you have that charisma. You have to have the charisma to be a leading man.
I mean, you can, but your movie is not going to be super successful.
No, I don't mean leading man as
in... I love him.
Yeah, I don't mean leading man as in this actor is the leading man of this movie. I mean leading man as in, oh, that's a Keanu Reeves movie. I'm going to go see it.
Yeah, exactly.
Because that's exactly what you do.
Exactly right.
You know, Vin Diesel, The Rock, Tom Hanks. Tom Cruise,
All the
Harrison
Toms.
Ford. But who are the ones who exist who are coming around the last 10 years? There aren't any. There are very few.
Yeah.
Well,
because Hollywood
I mean,
forgot that you need charismatic actors.
Well, in Hollywood, we used to call it the it factor, not charisma, because I think, again, it goes down to how you define that. And it's just, some actors just have it, and some actors just don't. I mean,
the it factor.
Yeah.
You're right. Yeah, that's
I mean, look at the guy from Twilight. I forget his name. He's playing Batman now.
Pattinson.
Yeah, Robert Pattinson. Like, he's not a very charismatic guy, but he's a leading man. You know.
Okay,
No,
here's one that
no.
was-
Actually, he's fucking. Sorry for the language, but he is awesome. Did you guys see Tenet?
I unfortunately did see Tenet. Yes.
No,
It was terrible.
Tenet is the lead guy that they got in that movie, the black guy. And I don't know why.
Denzel Washington's son.
Yeah.
I don't know why they cast that guy. He is
Denzel
the
Washington's
most-
son.
Yeah, he's
Is it
Denzel
actually
Washington's
his
son. Yeah.
He's actually
Maybe
Denzel
that's why.
Washington's son.
That's maybe the way they got him. Because Denzel Washington is one of the most charismatic actors of all time.
Yeah, that's
The
another
guy
one.
from-
Yeah, I forgot him.
The guy from Tenet, I could not watch him. I was just like, this is the worst actor I have ever seen on. He's so bland. He was so boring. And then Pattinson comes in, and I was like, this guy's great. I never
guy-
thought Robert.
The guy who
Pattinson
plays
could act.
Venom. Who's the guy who plays Venom?
Tom Hardy.
Leading man. You know what I mean?
I disagree. I don't like Tom Hardy at all. I think.
Well, I
Tom
mean, you
Hardy
can
is-
not like him, but he has
No.
on-screen
In the
presence.
sense that I don't think he has charisma. I don't think he has it factor. I think he's very much like Christian Bale, where he's a very good actor, but I don't think he's charismatic.
No, that's-
actor.
well,
But
first time
that
we
may
saw
just
him,
be
I
a
thought-
different.
Well,
perspective.
we're getting pretty far away from writing and getting into the subjective territory here, but
That's true. We're talking more.
Yeah,
about
yeah, we're talking about acting here. That's
Sorry.
what this show's about.
That was all my fault.
So let's get into the final sequel mistake topic here, which is a bigger and bigger doomsday threat. And this is a common mistake that sequels make, which is trying to up the spectacle quotient by creating bigger and more ominous threats at the expense of an emotional character story. And we see this in a lot of movies where it's like the light in the sky thing, where it's like shooting down and into like the ground or a building like that. And everyone's
DC
like,
Comics.
yeah, everyone's like, oh my God, it's a light in the sky. It's going to kill everything. Then there's also this concept that the threat that's posed to humanity is so big that it loses all meaning, because you can't kind of like connect to the general sense of humanity in a film because you just don't care. You care about like smaller, more intimate characters rather than like this kind of like it's kind of like, you know, like how much is $1 million? Like, has anyone ever seen $1 million and held it in their hands? How do you quantify that in your brain? And so the question becomes, it's like, if you make the next thing a bigger Death Star, like how big do you have to go until it gets to be comical? And does it make more sense to draw back the film into a more intimate threat as opposed to a bigger existential threat? So you saw this in Empire Strikes Back, where instead of making a bigger Death Star, it was all about Darth Vader kind of threatening the friends and family of Luke Skywalker. Mm-hmm. And because they pulled that back and made it a much more intimate threat, I feel like that movie stands above and beyond all the sequels that we've seen from other franchises as the gold standard. And you saw this in Wrath of Khan, too, where they made the threat more intimate, where it was like a rivalry between Khan and Kirk. So, you know, it is possible to pull back and make the threat more intimate and smaller, and therefore more emotionally resonant to the audience than it is to just be like, oh, now we've got a planet-sized Death Star. So what do you guys think of that? Let's start with you, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, I talked about when you said bigger and bigger doomsday threat. For a moment, I thought doomsday threat might be a euphemism, but let's move on.
Size doesn't matter. We all know that.
So they, I kind of referenced this when I was talking about my sort of hypothetical version of a Justice League movie, right? In my mind, I was like, once you get that big, gosh, okay, this is all going to be euphemism, isn't it? Once you get that big, you know, with that big of a villain, and you know, especially like with the Avengers movie, and you know, you had this massive, you know, Infinity War is just like the biggest. How would you then, like, they basically just said we're not going to do any more Avengers movies, right? Because once we did Infinity War, it was like so big they can't, you know, they're like that universe is over with. And then of course they did Black Widow. I mean, to some degree, I think the Black Widow, the size of that movie, the scope of that movie was right. You know, the movie had a lot of mistakes. It wasn't a great movie. But the scope was right. You go from that massive villain, that really huge scale, tons and tons of characters, to just a few characters, a small story of a few characters stopping a villain that's not like the biggest threat ever.
They did that with Far From Home, the Spider-Man sequel. You know what I mean? It came after Endgame, and it was much smaller, while the overall stakes were higher, the stakes to Peter were much smaller.
To Peter, right, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, that's exactly right. And you have to kind of do that where you wax and wane, where you ebb and you flow. You go big and then you go small, and that kind of, you don't just want to go bigger, because then you're exactly right, Matthew. I mean, and also I do think that the audience gets exhausted with that. The audience will get exhausted with like, okay, you're gonna. There was a TV series called Superman the Animated Series. It came out after the Batman the Animated Series. You guys remember that?
Yeah, seen it.
And my buddy, I used to watch that as a kid. Yeah, I used to watch that as a kid. Now my buddy had I stopped watching cartoons when I was a kid, but a lot of my friends kept watching cartoons. So a buddy of mine
still
was
watch
like,
cartoons.
I have all these Superman cartoons. Like, I was a little bit of in a nostalgic mood, so I watched through a bunch of them at once. And when I was watching through a bunch of them at once, it was like, I started to really like these one-off stories that were like very different from the general formula, because the general formula was like, Superman is at the Daily Planet. There's some kind of like super villain that shows up. There's like, he's got to figure out how to find him, how to fight him, what the villain wants, whatever. And then there's this massive fight scene at the end. And it was always this like massive fight scene where, they're breaking down buildings and they're busting up rocks and all kinds of craziness is happening. And the first few episodes you saw that, it was like really impressive. Like that animated series is the first time I saw something as egregious superhero-wise as like this robot character had like taken Superman's head and like smashed it into lava. Metallo, you remember this scene? Yeah. And I was like, that is brutal. And that kind of brutality was, I think, the first time ever depicted in that animated series, and it was a very cool thing. But the problem is, as the series went on, they just kept doing that, and it got to be boring. It actually got to be boring to see these fight scenes. I would watch the story, skip over the fight scene, and then see how it ends. That's how I would watch those as I watched through them, and as an adult, by the way, watching back, and you can kind of get away with that with a kids show, but once you get into the world of like multi-million, hundreds of millions of dollar movies, you wouldn't be able to get away with it, I think, just to make like 3, 4, 5, 6 sequels of a film that all basically had the same size and scope. You want to ebb and flow. You want to go back and forth so that, because you can tell an amazing small story, small scope story. And so there's no reason to just make everything big.
Even in the course of your own movie, one movie, it's not technically a sequel, but it's kind of, because everybody's so familiar with Superman. But in Man of Steel, the ending, the most common complaint for the ending of Man of Steel is that it's a fight scene that never ends. Right? It's 14-minute long fight scene.
Wonder Woman was the same.
Yeah, Wonder Woman was the same.
It was a decent film, but I couldn't watch the ending.
Those movies both have the same problem. They end and then they keep going. So Man of Steel, the emotional resonance of Man of Steel, right? The emotional ending of Man of Steel, where the story is resolved, his journey is resolved, the relationships are all resolved, is when he comes down and he kisses Lois Lane. That is the end of the movie. And then it goes on for 20 more minutes. Yeah. And same thing with Wonder Woman. The end of Wonder Woman is when she kills the general. And then it goes on for 15 more minutes. And so it's like,
and these are like 15 more minute fight scenes.
Yeah, and they're bad. It's like, it doesn't matter how cool it looks. Yeah. It's not good. The thing about stakes is like people confuse. I said earlier, people confuse stakes with bigger, and you get bigger with stakes, but then they have to become more personal. So I wrote this blurb. I write blurbs on the side for other authors, and I have this friend Brandon Ellis who has a science fiction series, and I was asking him, like, okay, what is the stakes of the story, right? It's about this humans on Mars and there's aliens and stuff. And he's like, well, the universe is going to be destroyed. And I'm like, that's great. What are the stakes to him? He's like, well, I mean, humanity would be destroyed.
Yeah, the universe is where he keeps all of his stuff.
What are the stakes to him? Well, his daughter could be killed. But I mean, and I'm like, no, that's it right there. You don't even have to mention the universe being destroyed. Because the stakes aren't the universe being destroyed. That will happen. The stakes are he has to save his daughter.
Yeah, the end of the world storyline is a generic storyline. If you want to just copy paste a story that everybody's heard a million times, there you go.
Also, the whole save the world storyline, it's hard for audiences to invest in that because it's such a broad concept. So like if you want your audience to be invested in the outcome of the story, the stakes have to be something that the audiences can understand. So it's like, oh, if my kid is in danger, I can understand that type of thing. If a loved one is in danger, I can understand that type of thing.
That's why John Wick works so well on an emotional level,
with
and
the dog.
The sequel did not.
Exactly. The dog was such a brilliant thing to do.
It was
genius.
Yeah.
Genius.
But it wasn't
actually,
just the dog. It was the last
everything
gift
the dog
from
represented.
his dead wife.
Yeah.
Of course. Well, of course.
Yeah,
but
everything the dog represented. Yeah.
The dog was something that we can all agree is like something that is not worth killing like every single person in the world for. But to John Wick, it was because of what it represented, like you're saying.
Apparently Australia isn't concerned about it either.
Yeah, apparently not. We need to send John Wick to Australia.
This is what Wolverine did so well. The Wolverine, old man Wolverine, so old man Logan. Oh, it was Logan. Sorry.
Yeah.
They went from these massive Wolverine movies and these massive X-Men movies, and they went, let's tell this little story about this one man. It was essentially like The Professional, right? It's like The Professional. It's like, let's have this one old man protecting this little girl, and that's the movie. And what a great idea! What a great idea.
It was a good idea. I hated the execution.
It
wasn't my favorite movie. It wasn't.
It's the lone wolf and cub trope.
I mean, there are other things that did it long before that, but it's the execution that I didn't like, because you guys are old enough to remember superhero movies and superhero shows that existed before 2008. And what was the one thing they did in almost every show? We're going to have a superhero, but superhero powers are expensive to film, so we're going to take the hero's powers away from him. You guys remember Dark Angel? They were constantly taking their powers away from her.
I never saw that as a pattern, but maybe I'm just...
Yeah, no, I mean, they're constantly taking the powers away from them, constantly not putting them in costume, and it's just like you can only take so much of that, and then to have it come back in Logan, especially when all the critics are like, Logan's so good, and I'm like, no, the Wolverine was good, I thought. But
Logan, did they take Logan's powers away from him?
Yeah, there was something in the water that suppressed mutant powers, and so Logan didn't have powers anymore. He had his claws, but he had no powers. He couldn't heal.
I don't remember that for some reason. I guess
that is a way to kind of illustrate character, which is when you have a character who's overpowered or has some type of ability, and you take that away from them, and then they have to succeed despite that handicap. That's something that can really endear them to an audience.
Yeah. You wouldn't want to do it for monetary constraints, though. You want to do it because it's a good story idea.
Only if it's something that isn't done all the time. You know what I mean? There's certain superhero tropes that are done all the time, and that's one of them.
Well, I think that you're looking back to a time pretty long past. I don't think that's something that happens.
Not that long past. I'm only 48.
But there's also this concept of so you have overpowered characters, right? You have people like Superman.
I don't consider Logan overpowered.
I'm not referring to Logan in this one. I'm kind of going off on a different thread
You're just saying
here.
This isn't a bad thing to do necessarily.
Yeah, well, what I'm saying is one day I really want to do a deep dive into the Luke Cage Netflix series, because that's one of the best examples of terrible writing I could ever possibly point out to anyone. And the whole thing about Luke Cage is because he's invulnerable to everything, there's never a danger to him or a physical danger. Yeah, there's nothing at stake. Like, he can just walk into a room full of guys with guns and not have to worry about it. But the minute that you give him the assignment where it's like, okay, you've got to keep this person alive, and they're the ones who are constantly in danger and they're vulnerable, and so he has to use his invulnerability to protect that person, then it becomes an interesting story. And so that's just an example of instead of the entire city being at stake, it's just this one person that you have to protect, and the audience can identify with that one person and learn to love that one person and want that one person to survive. And when you have a situation where maybe that person dies and it's a kid or something like that, and a Man on Fire situation where Denzel Washington thinks that the kid's dead and he goes on a revenge tear, that's something that audiences can invest in. And so I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that the bigger and bigger doomsday threat thing, it has its place, but it gets overused too much in the sequels. And sometimes, like Chris said, it's better to ebb and flow, where the sequel gets a little bit smaller, more personal, and then the next one you can blow it up again, then you pull it back. And so I think that's a big mistake that Hollywood makes, and it just comes down from laziness and bad writing.
One thing I like to do, and you can kind of reset your stakes, is in my Full Metal Superhero series, you start off with, she's trying to find her parents, right? And then she gets her parents, and then she's trying to expose the people who took her parents. And then it turns out that, there were certain extraterrestrial forces that were behind it. And so she's trying to figure out who those are. And then she defeats them only to find out that the aliens involved in it are even much bigger threat than they are. And then she has to destroy all of them. And she does. And then reset, she's back on Earth, and she's trapped in a city, and she can't get to her armor. So the story's about her trying to survive while she gets to her armor, and then just sort of rebuilds from there. So it's like a reset, because you can only go so high before now you've created this ever-increasing stake bubble that you cannot possibly fulfill. So you can reset your stakes as long as the stakes of any given story resonate with the audience who's reading it and matter. Yeah. So you can have those external stakes be whatever you want, but the internal stakes are what make people want to watch a character or want to read a character. Like, what that character goes through. I like that term. Yeah, and you kind of have to, because you can only save the world so many times before it becomes meaningless.
Yeah. All right, guys. So that was our discussion about the big mistakes when it comes to crafting sequels that Hollywood makes. I want to jump to some super chats and then some questions from the chat real quick. So first up is from Gosso with a $15 Australian super chat. Thank you so much, Gosso. Great stream, guys. I want Hollywood to bring back basic action movie scripts fighting terrorists and do the stunts, no CGI. Yeah. I think that would be, a no-brainer, but of course Hollywood doesn't believe in that. Thanks so much for that $15, Gosso. And then from Backyard TARDIS for $10. Mr. Reagan, you would love Justice League Unlimited, lots of ebb and flow, especially the episodes with the question, a superhero who exposes government conspiracies. Have you ever seen Justice League Unlimited, Chris?
I have not. I will look it up as soon as this is done.
It's made by the same people who did the Batman animated series and the Superman.
I love the question. He was
Bruce
so
Timm
cool.
And everything. No,
yeah.
Bruce Timm and that whole crew, those guys are like legit geniuses. The fact that they didn't bring those guys in to do all the new DC stuff is one of my favorite scenes in anything ever, is this moment where I think it's who's the villain from Superman, the main villain, Lex Luthor. Lex Luthor, I think, somehow changes bodies with the Flash, and he's sitting there. This is a Justice League cartoon thing, and he's sitting there hanging out with the Justice League, and they figure out that he's not the Flash. And so he runs away from them, and he's in the bathroom hiding out, and he's like, all right, that my plan to spy on the Justice League didn't work. He's like, well, at least I got to figure out who the Flash is. And he takes off his cowl thing, and he looks in the mirror, and he goes, I have no idea who this is. It's a great moment.
Yeah,
and
it
there's
is.
so many beautiful little things like that in the story. There's another thing that they wrote where Batman is just absolutely obliterating every villain, and Robin's like, knock it off, you're gonna give it away, and we slowly figure out it's not Batman, it's Superman in Batman's cowl, and Batman's been missing the whole time. And it's like, and he's like throwing villains across the room, and there's like, what the hell? They're like, why? How did Batman get so strong? And it's such a great idea.
Especially he was fighting Bane in that scene too. That's the thing. He was fighting Bane. Sure. And Bane like grabbed him and starts squeezing the life out of him, and all of a sudden he's just like, Batman's like, and he's like,
yeah. And they're like, this is not possible. Batman's not this strong. I just thought that is such a genius thing, putting Superman in Batman's costume because he's looking for Batman, and this is a good way of getting in there. And they just don't realize that they're fighting Superman, so they're a little bit overconfident. I mean, just absolute genius writing that stuff. If you're a superhero fan, if you like that stuff, so smart. And I thought, man, if you're gonna get somebody to write a feature-length screenplay, a live-action screenplay for any DC property, get those guys, man. And it was such a mistake really not to go to those guys. Such a mistake.
They do their animated movies, and they're arguably good and bad. They did an animated movie about Batman having sex with Batgirl.
I heard about that.
And I'm just like, that's Bruce Timm, and I'm just like, why did you feel the need to do that? That completely changes the dynamic.
Well, every writer has a bad day, you know.
Yeah,
so Buford T. Justice says, I couldn't agree with you more on Jeremy Renner's Bourne. I really enjoyed the Bourne legacy. So thank you, Buford T. Justice.
The fact that you are a sheriff is not germane to the situation. Sorry, that's a quote from Smoking the Bandit.
Joker Voice says, Palpatine is back, 1,000 Star Destroyers with Death Star cannons.
Exactly. Yeah, that's true. That's true.
That's a great example of the bigger and bigger doomsday threat.
Just logistics. In the original Star Wars, they had all the manuals and stuff, and I'm a geek, I owned all that stuff. Each Star Destroyer had a crew of like 30,000. So how do they man all those Star Destroyers? Where do those people eat?
I don't know what you're talking about. Those movies don't exist.
All right, let's see here. Empire Strikes Back, Vader is also 5 steps ahead of the rebels the entire film, that and killing his subordinates until the very end. So it's always good when you have a bad guy who's actually competent and actually poses a threat to the main characters.
Apology accepted, Captain Nito.
Yeah. But you know, one of the bad writing tropes that I always kind of like hate, and I see it like when I see it, it just takes me out of the movie, is when the bad guys kill their subordinates. You know, where like I would think that if you were
at the time, I'm not sure that was overdone.
Well, no, it's been overdone for decades.
Well, you think
I'm not talking about a specific movie. I'm just talking about the trope.
Yeah, who would work for you after that?
Exactly. If I was like one of the other henchmen, and I saw like the bad guy, the boss, kill one guy for just like a minor screw up, I'd be like, I'm out of here. I don't want to work for this guy.
That's fair.
I don't remember the movie, but there was a movie where the bad guy is talking to one of his henchmen, and the henchman is just looking around, kind of fidgeting, and he's like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "Looking for plastic." Because in the movie, he had previously killed somebody in that very spot and wrapped him up in plastic they'd already put down. And the henchman was like, I'm not going to, that's not going to be me. I forget the movie, but kind of played with that trope of killing your henchman. And, when it's Cobra Commander or Darth Vader, you can get away with it. I think somebody mentioned Cobra Commander on there. But,
They did this relatively well in Breaking Bad because this was all part of the downfall of the main character, right? The main character, Heisenberg, he started to make mistakes. He started to get paranoid. He started to get desperate. He started to get crazy. And he was killing his own allies to some degree. I mean, he was obviously, in the first part of the series, he was killing the people who would have killed him. But then as it gets further along, he starts killing people he doesn't need to kill. Yeah. And he starts doing things he doesn't need to do.
So Joker Voice says, Winter Soldier follows what you said, Kadish, and is arguably the best MCU film. I would agree with that. I think Winter Soldier was kind of like, it's in the top tier of Marvel movies, and it broke all the bad sequel rules that we covered here, where, it had the steadfast character. It didn't have too many villains. It didn't rehash the original story, but it didn't change things too drastically. And there wasn't a big threat. It was actually a very intimate threat for Steve, and it kind of goes back to the Wrath of Khan thing, where like the bad guy and the good guy have some type of personal connection.
Yeah, it was actually
2 villains, right? There's his buddy, but then there's like the guy who is
the stinker villain, and then there's the soldier villain, right? There's the antagonist and the obstacle.
Well,
the antagonist of the movie is
Robert Redford.
Robert Redford, and the obstacle is Winter Soldier.
But the direct antagonist was not Steve's direct antagonist. Like Robert Redford wasn't really Steve's bad guy to fight. It was Bucky, and Nick Fury was the one who was tasked with taking down the main bad guy. So like it just worked on a lot of different levels. And Joker's right. It is one of the better MCU films. Let's see here from Novus Tullius. Buffy is a great example of this. In the early seasons, it's saving individual lives. By the later seasons, the Earth almost ends many times. I still love the show, but early seasons are better in my opinion. It's a shame Jude's not on the stream because she'd probably have a lot to say about that. But he's right. It went from, I think the best season was season 3 where where her and Angel were like, mortal enemies after 2 seasons of developing that romance. And after that, it just kind of went to like the whole doomsday of the season big bad type thing. So I would. Either of you guys ever watch Buffy the Vampire Slayer?
Oh hell yeah!
I watched that later in life. When I was growing up, that was actually a popular show when I was in high school, but I didn't watch it because I thought it was some chick show with bad special effects.
Kind of was a chick
And then
show with bad special effects.
Yeah, but then my buddies all were like obsessed with this show. Guys that I'd meet like later in life, and I'm an adult, and my buddies are still talking about this stupid show from the '90s. So I'm like, well, I'll watch it and see why it's so great. And this show doesn't apply very well, I think. Basically just because that show wasn't so much about the story. I mean, obviously there were some good story elements, but that show was about the characters, their relationships. It was about, like, you could go home after school and watch these guys who were, like, funnier and cooler than your friends at school and kind of just hang out with them for an hour or whatever. Like, the stories were kind of fun, but they were kind of disposable a lot of times, or Monster of the Week stuff. But the relationships those guys had and how funny and charming they were, I think that was really the pull of the show and why people loved it so much.
I kind of stopped watching it when Seth Green left the show because I really liked his dynamic with all the actors and stuff. And then I just sort of watched it intermittently until it ended. But I love the finale. I thought the finale was really great, bittersweet, and yeah.
Yeah.
So school or something, right? Something like that.
The entire town went into like a sinkhole.
Went into hell, and like half the cast died.
All right, so we're going to end with this last comment from Gasso. Terminator 2 was one of those well-written sequels. I feel possibly best written. I agree. I love Terminator 2. It's one of my all-time favorite movies. Better than one of those rare sequels that are better than the original, in my opinion.
Very rare. But yeah, there's a few of them. But yeah, Terminator 2 is probably the creme de la creme. That's the one that everybody discusses when
What's
they're
interesting is in Terminator 2 they turned the bad guy into the good guy, and that's kind of it's not done often.
You think that they were breaking a rule there, but
yeah, you would.
They also introduced a new bad guy who was even more badass than the old.
But the thing was,
scarier.
But if you look at it, James Cameron understood why the first movie was popular. Mm-hmm. It wasn't time travel, right? It wasn't about saving the world of the future. It was about, hey, here's this awesome dude who is a robot who like runs stuff over with his car and breaks down doors and feels no pain, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That was the thing about the first movie that was so compelling, was the Terminator.
Yep.
And
it's
so
just basically a big long chase sequence.
Yeah, and since you understand that, you can do whatever you want, and he did. He turned into the hero, and it was still great because he understood what made that movie work.
Well, he also made it a family saga where, like, John Connor, his father was basically the Terminator, or at least surrogate father. All right, guys. So that was our discussion about the bad writing of sequels. Thank you so much for joining us today. Chris, where can they find out more about you and check out your stuff?
Well, if you like politics, and it doesn't matter what your politics are, you should watch my show, Mr. Reagan. It's on the YouTubes. That's basically the only place that, I'm on Twitter, but that's whatever. YouTube's really where it's at. Watch some of my shows. You might hate me. You might love me. And if you hate me, comment and tell me what you hate, and we'll see. Maybe I'll read it.
Well, who could hate that face, honestly? All right, so Jeff, why don't you tell everyone where they can find your books and all that good stuff?
So all my books are available on Amazon.com and are in Kindle Unlimited, so you can check out the whole series and binge read it. Don't start it before you go to bed, because my number one thing that people tell me is I started before I went to bed and I was up till 5 in the morning reading. So I'm very good
brag right
at that sort of thing. So my books are exciting and fun and not a lot of politics, mostly just classic themes. And you can also, if you're into audiobooks, you can get them wherever audiobooks are sold. They're made through Tantor Media, which is the second largest producer of audiobooks in the world. And it's the Full Metal Superhero series and Superhero by Night. You can also find me on Facebook at Facebook, blah, 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 Jeffrey H. Haskell, or, on Amazon, Jeffrey H. Haskell. I'm the only one.
Sounds good. All right, guys. Thank you all so much. Be sure to, if you haven't subscribed to the channel already, subscribe to saltynerdvideo.com. Takes you right to our YouTube channel. And also, be sure to check out if Jeff will mute his mic real quick so his chair isn't interrupting me. If you want to check out saltynerdpodcast.com, that takes you to our audio-only version of the podcast. We do 3 episodes a week. Tomorrow we are dropping the Shitty Space Movies episode. It's a lot of fun. It's very funny. We review some Roger Corman movies and Ice Pirates and all that good stuff. So if you like to laugh and you like to make fun of movies, definitely check out the Salty Nerd Podcast. And if you want to help support the show, please consider becoming a member of our membership site. Just go to saltynerdclub.com. You can check us out there. And if you don't want to give us money, then just hit that like button, give us a thumbs up for the algorithm, and also just tell your friends about us. We really appreciate it. Anyway,
I want money.
Well, we all love money. But this is Matthew Kadish. Thank you all for coming to this Bad Writing live stream. We're going to try to do these every Thursday when we can. And if you guys have any ideas for topics that you would like to hear me and my distinguished panel of critics and authors to talk about, please be sure to let us know in the comments of these videos. We appreciate it. Thank you so much. And as always, stay salty, my friends. See you next time.